being said, I now With that being said, I now call on Prime Minister. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Awesome. POI through unmuting yourself. No preferred gender pronoun. Yeah. Speech will start in 3, 2, 1. The political platform has given immigrants a void option, one that we can never exercise. We say the way to do it is to give them a veto and the right to always be represented, no matter how small it is, for immigrants, for their survival and livelihood. We prefer a world where immigrants and minority has the ability to rein in on political party, and there's proper representation, decision making that can be vital. How then you should just this debate? There are two metrics in this debate. Firstly, opposition defends status quo. We have to go through the normal electoral process that heavily outweighs immigrants due to the fact they're minority inside the and often demonized inside society. Secondly, opposition to defend why it's okay to trade off these people's survival rate for the sake of keeping the majority happy, whom already have a lot of opt-out mechanism and protection, leverage inside the current system. So what are the model of side opening government? We're going to, firstly, our stance that we prefer immigrants to have a block representative inside the current government, i.e. being MP inside the government, just to be huge enough to tip the scales and increase points of discussion, but not enough to overpopulate the MPs, for example, so that they would just rein in on all of them. There's going to be a balance inside these MPs at the end of the day, so most likely that's going to be the case. Secondly, these representatives are going to be strategic and representative individual chosen by the immigrants themselves, so most likely these are not individuals who are going to exercise that power badly, or privileged individual who doesn't understand the immigrant struggle because they are chosen by the society and the immigrants in themselves. What are the impact and the type of policy that is going to be created out of this? We're talking about funding for youth groups of immigrants, education training, so for example, job creation, funding businesses of specific places to them. Note that this type of policy is not necessarily going to change a lot in terms of funding and economic policy and etc., but rather is going to be net positive policy that is going to increase the benefit towards the minority, because that's most likely going to be the level of power that they are capable to do. I'm going to bring three things. Firstly, how has the political process have failed immigrants significantly? Secondly, about increasing trust and hatred. Lastly, about principle and justification as to why this is justified. Firstly, let's talk about how has the political process has failed us significantly. This is the counterfactual that opposition needs to defend at the end of the day. While it is true that opposition might say that representative of immigrants would be one that is done naturally, for example, through the electoral process, we think this is unlikely and bad due to 5 reasons. Firstly, voting MPs are majority-based, and election often favor what the majority wants. This is like in the US, where the discussion about immigrants is about trampling them down, and how to restrict immigration as opposed to how to save them inside the country, because it's based on the perspective of what the majority wants, and mostly what the majority wants is to trample them down and to ensure that they do not enter the country, as opposed to save immigrants inside this particular country. So note that election are very majority based and focuses on the perspective of what they want. Secondly, MPs chosen are also non-immigrant, privileged white male that doesn't necessarily understand the struggle of being immigrant. Just like Jared Kushner or Jokowi, who doesn't understand the problem of being Chinese at the end of the day. Even under side government opposition best case, where there are immigrant MPs that are naturally chosen through the democratic process, we say this is still going to be bad, because these are individuals who have to cater to the majority to win this election. We're talking about Ahok, for example, is a privileged Chinese individual who doesn't understand how it feels like to be a poor Chinese individual who need only eats rice and salt, for example, for their living. Or Kamala Harris, a privileged immigrants and privileged black individual who betrays their sister from brother because they create extreme policing at the end of the day. So even on the side opposition, on their base case, you're still going to choose MPs from immigrants who has been interacting a lot with majority, and who has been making a lot of trade-off in their life and ensuring that they do not understand the struggle of being a true immigrant at the end of the day, because of their privileges and because they have to cater to the majority. Fourth reason is because often participation are also bad due to minority struggle, like language barrier, cultural differences. They don't necessarily understand what these politicians are talking about, or they don't necessarily understand what they stand for due to the complexity of the politics system in the current status quo. So it's a problem about chicken or the egg, where the participation of these immigrants is also low, and there's no natural things that can happen because there are a lack of understanding of the political spectrum. And hence, in order to this, we need to first start the job discussion and start it by ensuring that they have to participate, and there are individual ways sure to create impact. Oftentimes, apathy also comes from the inability to create changes. So there are a lot to no amount of point or function to participate if no immigrant representative is going to be chosen at the end of the day, right? Lastly, because of lack of power due to rise naturally. So opposition expect immigrants who have lesser amount of capability to interact with the majority, but lesser amount of capital to rise naturally. This simply doesn't make sense because they have significant amount of lesser power comparatively to the competition of majority who has connection, capital, and all of those things to win the election at the end of the day. So the conclusion of this argument is to prove to you why is it that the current function or the current method that's going to be used by side opposition is unlikely to create any changes whatsoever. What is our counterfactual? We bring three things. Firstly, one that is we bring a counterfactual that is specifically representative that is specifically chosen by immigrants representatives that truly understand the struggle. These are not privileged individual, for example, a privileged immigrants who given everything in a silver spoon. These are people who truly understand the struggle of being immigrants from the get-go. B, we also bring and shed light to issue. Like they won't change the overall process, but at least when they enter the parliament, for example, there are discussion and there are approaches that can provide context as to the struggle and what the immigrants actually want inside policy discussion at the end of the day. So sure, they're not going to actively reign in the government, but at least there are a voice of immigrants that can provide context. Thirdly, there's also going to be a focus on net positive policy, education that can trickle down towards individual of immigrants, for example, creating of net positive policy that is going to impact them in a positive manner. Here's the impact. We understand that the issue about opposition and benefit, etc., it's important, but here's why our impact is more important. Three things. A, immigrants are often the scapegoat of election because no one understands the struggle. B, they are unrepresented, are treated like second-rate citizens, so we need to protect them in this particular manner. C, policy that does not represent what they want, but and how to save their lives, for example. We provide an assurance of all of this under side proposition. How then you should weigh this argument? A, severity, because people in minority needs this type of protection. Meanwhile, majority right is going to be violated on side proposition. We think it's okay because they have a lot of protection mechanism. B, vulnerability, because they are much more vulnerable individual. And C, likelihood of this individual being inside MPs at the end of the day. So secondly, let's talk about trust and hatred, because while opposition might say society will hate them and mistrust and hate, we say this happens on their side because A, hatred happens due to lack of larger voices that explain their issue. We fix that on our side when there are individuals that explain their issue. B, trust can begin when they see MP meaningful decisions in their life, because these MPs from immigrants will also contribute to improving majority life. So you would understand and see them as a functional human being when you see this MP improve your life as a majority, and hence trust increases. C, minority are more confident and educated through this policy because mingling with majority will be easier. The way is that this is the prerequisite of trust is representation, and representation can only be done on our side. Lastly, let's talk about why this principle is justified. There are three things here. Firstly, because government benefit from the immigrants economic policy through cheap labor, for example. So we ought to give them these types of rights because government also benefit from the migrants' cheap labor. Secondly, government are also obligated to immigrants because they want cheap labor and has the interest to ensure that immigrant comes to their country. I'm talking about the American dream inside the United States, for example. Lastly, because of reparation, because note that the fact that these individuals need to get out of their country is because due to the failure of the larger country and colonialization that happens to the country that left the existing country of this immigrant in ruin, making sure that the only chance of them getting a good life is to move to your country. As a point of reparation, you need to represent them in the political party and political structure that you have, because it is your fault as a developed country that they are in ruin and they have to go to another country and you have to be an immigrant to have a meaningful life. Very proud to propose.
We thank Honorable Prime Minister for what was a fine speech. I now call on Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Check. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. POI through chat. Let me prepare my timer. Okay. All right, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judges understand that being an immigrant is very challenging. The opening government cannot say just because one person or like 10 people go into politics and sit in the parliament, like automatically means they're able to cater all of the policies or the important issues by the immigrants, knowing how the politics nature, right? You have to compromise and all that. You cannot simplify just because they sit there, everything will run smoothly. They haven't proved to us how likely this immigrant being in politics will be successful, knowing all of those challenges. And we think that is not strategic for us immigrant to solve the issues, and would rather go with the status quo that with the current system, having having NGOs, for example, or a movement, we think that this is much more beneficial for us, the immigrants. But before going further to our substantive, I would like to give several rebuttals. So basically, they're talking about how representation is really important, no matter how big. They concern about the idea of survivability, right? They mention about how the problem of this immigrant finding jobs and all that. We think that number one, the idea of survivability, we think like this immigrant, first of all, they already have the certain level of survivability at the moment when they are able to enter certain countries, right? They are leaving their home and all that. We think like this nature of immigrants, if you're talking about survivability as human being able to, get shelters and all that, we think that they can cater that. But if we're talking about, them being in politics, is completely whole different conversation, ladies and gentlemen, because in politics, you're not only talking about how you're able to survive as a person, but how you're able to survive in politics, right? If you're talking about countries like US or Germany, no matter how strong you hold your principle or idealism to support the immigrants, in the end of the day, if you are into the politics, let's say in the US, for example, in the end of the day, you will be either in the left side of the political spectrum or in the right side. In the end of the day, you're going to be compromising all of those values, or at least you need to cover certain problem, or have to letting go of certain core issues in order to make certain policies to be addressed in politics. So we don't think this is strategic for us, but later we'll explain more in our arguments, right? So now our substantive. So basically our stance, we just go stick with the status quo. We'll not create all these special states in parliament. We're just we're just going to focus on the leaders that we already have, that already, we think that they already concerned about the immigration itself. And in addition to the movement by the NGOs and also activists, it is more transparent, where people can do movement on the street, for example, and they're addressing these issues to the known leaders. And these leaders are able to tell their constituents like what kind of policies that are good for these immigrants. We think that that is politically better for us. So we think that this argument already answering the opponent's concern. Well, they're actually concerned about how like the issues of this immigrant, who is going to cater this if they're not in the parliament. We think that there are already actors that already cover all of these things, right? With things like NGOs, or also people that concern about this issue. We think that this is a lot better, because first, these immigrants do not have to be, limited or tarikat under certain contracts, or limited to the government itself, right? Because they're able to speak out freely, and also they're able to speak out all of the issues that they already experience while they are in that certain countries. We think that this will be more diverse in terms of the ideas that they want to speak out to the leaders, and and all things. Well, that's why we think that's better in our side of the house. So now let's talk about why is it not representative anyway, right? Number one, we think like this the mechanism by the opening government, like they're going to create seats. We think like that is not enough anyway, right? They, like in the end of the day, even if you give the certain seats to immigrants, you only give privilege to only certain groups of people, or certain nations, or certain religion community, for example. We don't think that this going to cater all immigrant needs, knowing that how diverse the immigrant itself, right? We think like it is better for us to invest on the known leaders or famous leaders that already concerned on this issue, that we think that they are able to put the gravity of this immigration issue into the bigger scale. So let's talk about Angela Merkel, for example. Like this Germany chancellor are able to put this immigration issue into a whole another level, right? Because because Germany are able to welcome more than 1 million refugees. Well, like so many immigrants coming to their countries, and we think like having this having Angela really welcoming this issue, it actually triggers how the nation's politics addressing the immigration issue. Not only that, we think that it will also trigger internationally, like France, for example, are also trying to consider this mechanism after Angela actually talks about it. We think like this is better because now, like comparatively, if you only have like random people representing immigration issues, they're not being able to influence the parliament well enough, ladies and gentlemen, because like first of all, they have to struggle to introduce who they are, where they come from, their background, and like knowing the fact, the challenges in as the immigrant itself. We think that only in extreme cases where like one super amazing immigrant that are able to influence the parliament and also create the strategic policies in the end of the day, which we don't think that will happen frequently, right? So that's why we think like it is not going to work in their side of the house. Secondly, why we think that it is important to maintain what is already happened in status quo, right? We believe like in their side of the house, they're not able to provide the strategic benefit anyway, ladies and gentlemen, because like even if they have seats, in the end of the day, they are not able to do the strategic things, like they're not able to vote for no confidence, for example. They are not able to talk about bills, which is actually the only way the nations are able to solve the immigration issues, right? Like things like finding jobs or taxes and all that. Those are the things that when you're able, when you're able to vote for no confidence and critics towards government and all that, which doesn't happen in the house. That's why we think it will not gonna work. So we stick to the status quo, way back to those things.
Okay, we thank Leader of Opposition for what was a fine speech. I now call on the Deputy Prime Minister. Here, here.
Hello. Hang on a second. Hi, can I be seen and heard?
Yes, you are both audible and visible.
Awesome. Okay. I prefer to take POIs through chat. So just drop them in the chat. I'll probably take one from closing. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think it is impossible to say that every single immigrant that tries to move out to another country knows everything about their survivability and everything about how their life is going to turn out. There is a massive information gap for all immigrants in the status quo, and countries already make it super appealing to move in, but at the end, what you get faced by is lots and lots of barriers that you cannot even overcome. 3 strategic flaws before I move on to the clashes of this debate. Firstly, on all of their claims, opening up opposition unfortunately gives very little structural reasons. So when they make claims like immigrants know their survivability, that status quo leaders are already concerned about immigrants, that NGO is enough, that Angela Merkel already knows everything about immigrants, these are unproven claims without supporting reasons. Second clarification is most of their arguments are neutralizing arguments, which means it is to say that the status quo is enough and that it's fine, the status quo. But insofar as we still prove that on our side, you still get benefits that increase benefits toward immigrants and also increase trust toward these immigrants for the common citizen so that they live more comfortably among the immigrants, then this is still a policy that you have to pursue because it improves the status quo and it brings more benefits than the proposal coming from opposition side. They don't prove any actual harm arguments. So as of now, like even without me going into the clashes, our arguments already win over theirs. The third clarification I want to make is they don't make any responses toward our arguments about trust and the principle that you should actually help immigrants in this way. Why is this crucial? Because the argument about trust actually benefits everyone, all citizens inside the nation, apart from the immigrants themselves, and this is quite a large-scale argument. And I think the principal argument means that OO still has a moral wrong that they have not corrected. Okay, so moving on to the clashes. I'm just going to make the clash center around our first argument because that's what OO only chose to engage with, which is that how the status quo has failed immigrants significantly. They have a couple claims here. The first claim that they make is that immigrants already know survivability and they're going to be fine and they're going to just move out with no problem. This is definitely a lie, because even in the status quo, people who do not even move to other countries, who try to just move from small cities to big cities inside their country, like metropolitan cities like Jakarta, for example, get fooled all the time, right? Because they end up being in slums at the end and they end up miscalculating these decisions. Why is this possible? What does their calculation actually look like? It is the calculation and the hope that there is a short-term loss that is going to be paid in the long term. There are several misconceptions inside this. The loss, first of all, the loss is not actually small, because when you're moving out, the costs of moving out, the cost of transferring every single thing you have is actually quite big, right? And also the barriers, most of all, are actually things that people do not see when they are trying to move out. This is because countries make it appealing for people to move out and to try to have the American dream, for example, and to have the dream life of, being the best musician ever out there, or being the best artist out there in the world, more than whatever your developing country can have, for example. But at the end of the day, what they get faced by is a lot of barriers. It's even difficult for you to get your first job, for example, because there are lots of language barriers that you actually face. It's difficult because no one has recognized your skills that you already had in your previous job, because they don't actually have the same certifications that they have in that other country, for example. Or the fact that racism is very, very prominent towards immigrants, and that a lot of people judge you with different standards and with pre-assumptions that are not even true about you, but this makes it very, very difficult for you to rise up in the ranks in your job, for example. So that means that the long-term hope that this pays off actually doesn't pay off. They don't actually get that green card, for example. They don't get that sustainable living, but stays as a low-income family that struggles to even survive in these countries. That's why their argument is a lie. The second thing that I want to rebut is that they said, you can just focus on status quo progress because status quo leaders already are concerned with immigrants and they actually already know this. The first thing to say is this is definitely a lie because of a general trend that is happening all over the world right now, which is that right-wing populism is actually rising, right? This means that there is increased racism and increased hatred toward immigrants because there is a lot of nationalism and distrust that is placed toward them, and people are prioritizing people from their own country first, for example. Immigrants are immediately labeled as terrorists even though there are no proof that this is true, for example, right? So the trend actually proves that that is not what leaders think. And the ones that are voted in power are usually the ones that are against immigrants. The second thing to say is they don't know the specific struggles of immigrants. This is where I also rebut like their Angela Merkel example. Angela Merkel is a native-speaking citizen who is in the majority culture and who is college educated. You cannot compare this to the life of the average immigrant who does not even speak the national language, who does not have the same culture and the same ways of communicating daily, who does not have the education that is recognized in that country, for example, or who does not even have a college education when they tried to move in and try to have a better life, for example, right? So what is exclusive on our side and what are these specific issues that immigrants, and only immigrants know? These are issues like, number one, knowing the language that is actually spoken and knowing how to convert best from that language to another one so that you can actually fit in the workforce. Knowing the cultural differences and how you should adapt and how you should not be misunderstood by the average person if you try to communicate in a harsher way, for example. You don't mean it, it's just that that's how people speak in your culture, for example. The third thing is, what are the bad jobs that these immigrants are actually trapped into? Because Angela Merkel certainly hasn't experienced being a very, very low-income worker who has to sell drugs, for example, for a living. We on our side provide immigrants who have the specific knowledge so that these immigrants do not fall into these jobs or so that they do not fall into crimes that further prove their that further increase their distrust in society and that worsens their livelihoods. These are the things that we protect immigrants from. The last thing to rebut here is their idea about NGOs. I think NGOs are not enough in the status quo. Number one, because they cannot challenge laws directly. It takes a very, very long time for you to gather that scale. Number two, they are not enough to convince the population that is generally right-wing and generally against immigrants in the status quo, because the number of people who actually empathize with immigrants is not that big, because the immigrants are like made up of a small population in most countries, for example, usually due to laws that are very, very restricting and limiting toward immigrants in the first place, which we fix on our side if immigrants are in the parliament. And the last thing to say is, I think we can flip this idea, right? So the work of these NGOs are going to be way better on our side if we have immigrant people inside the Congress who can actually forward these ideas to make sure that they come into fruition, to make sure that they are not just for discourse and for awareness at large, which is probably nice to have and sweet to have. But if they don't actually manifest into policies, that means another immigrant family who is starving. That means another immigrant child who does not get the proper education that they deserve. And that is why we are proud to propose.
We thank Deputy Prime Minister for what was a fine speech. I now call on Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here, here.
Check, I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Wait, give me seconds. Okay. Okay. Before I start my speech, I'm audible in this position. Okay. If my voice is under robotic, please just notify my friends, or yeah, just unmute yourself. And also, if you want to do Gavin, just also unmute yourself. And I will start a speech in 3, 2, 1. Oh, the opening government premise that is, if you want give benefit for the, or if you want to give jobless for the immigrant, for example, that is why you have to make sure that this immigrant looking for their own privilege first in order to get that jobless in the market. That is the seats that you provide as the government. What we say as the opening opposition is that the immigrant in status quo, we consider that the immigrant in status quo already hard also in order to find the job. But it is not the responsibility of them, of this immigrant, actually to get in first in the parliament. So then you as the local government could give them the job at the moment, right? It is an inherent responsible for the superpower country to give protection towards the immigrant, because you guys most likely the reason why they are suffering in the first place. For example, you are the one who create war, for example, in the Middle East. That is why it's inherent responsible for you in order to give them a protection or prepare or a proper life in the asylum seekers that they want to. But second of all, for example, the natural disaster destroy their home because of the carbon footprint that is created by this big country, for example. That is why you have the inherent responsible in order to give that protection also, proper living, for example, for these people. And this is not a good or a wise way and validity for in order to say that, oh, get in first in order to the parliament that you can insert your own agenda, for example, and then we give you the job. It is not possible in the first place. So that is why I never prove to you why then it is valid and also fair in the very first place in order to give this privilege for these people in order to looking for their own proper living. Meanwhile, you as the local government have that inherent responsible in the very first place. What I'm going to prove in my speech is the number one, why this privilege seat is bad in all of the conditions. Let's talk about this. In countries with a high number of immigrants, this is very impossible to have the representation that opening government want. Notice that 6 on 10 or more, which is very little number for countries like USA, for example, Germany, France, and etc., where they have a million number of nations of immigrants, right? This is only cover a limited amount of immigrant nations. This is bad at very point because you don't give up, you give a privilege towards a certain group of people only, but do not give towards to the others. In the end of the day, it could create the essence of discrimination towards a certain group of community, right? Especially also that this is under civil society decision, which is which is bad in several reasons. Number one, this vote from the local people will show the favorite one from the local people, which one that tracks the delay, for example. It tells you that this vote is invalid because number one, since the local people has different perspective or interest or bias towards a certain minority group, for example. They like some people, but there's a they also have the others one. But even of all, it's also lead towards a scenario where this people only follow the trend, right? They only follow the majority voters from the other people. That's why this vote might be invalid. But second, I think that in some cases, in a certain country, there is a major hate towards a certain group of people, right? For example, in USA, where the Asian and black community is hated, or in France, for example, where the Muslim community is less likely get voted, means that your vote as a local people is not going to be means that the result of that vote that is going to lead towards that representation is not going to cover all the people, even is going to discriminate a certain community because at some point you are not going to vote another community that hated by society, for example. Means that this privilege of sex is inherently bad. But even if this representation is exists in the very small number, this representation is not also significant because it is only limited to for example, which is not all layers of society, local society could understand this. Or business, for example, which is less likely to be beneficial for the immigrant because in the market, for example, will always be control or biased towards the one who has the capital, where the immigrant has no privilege for big access in the market, for example, which means that the things that you represent is not going to be beneficial back for you. It's only going to be harm you. In the end of the day, I will explain that why it's going to harm you. What we are afraid as the opposition is that what if there's a malicious intent from the local government towards us as a minority? Here's the thing. First, when you enter this parliament, means that now you are most likely under government control. Even if you have your own agenda to help your community, for example, the local government will always be able to lobby you to siding for them. Like, oh look, what else you want to be rebel on? We already give you pleasure or privilege here. We already give you the platform, for example, in order to speak up. For example, when you want more immigrant to enter a business work or job vacancy, for example, which is might be going to be given, but local government could easily do maneuver, for example, from high number immigrant in the labor job, for example, but low protection in the job place or low salary, for example. It is most likely to happen because the government have the because the government will always have the malicious intention because they only cares about the votes, for example, or the benefit or take benefit from you as the as the immigrant. But second, I think that this could be used as a political vehicle to gain voters or empathy from the local for the local people who cares about the immigrant issues, but also for the minority community, right? This is bad because as immigrant, you most likely will feel comfortable with this, but do not realize that they are using you as the political vehicle to gain voters only. I think that what we offer as the opening operation is that the status quo is going to be very beneficial because when the people already being there in order to criticize the local government, then you need to be care more about the immigrant, for example, where there is a law that the rules or the international people who always going to speak when there's oppression towards the people. You as the immigrant people also could be free to speak up, right? There's no anyone that keep you being should obey what the government say, especially when we look at the context, like you there is not any right for you as the immigrant when you have that seat in order to give votes of confidence or no confidence, means that there is not any kind of criticism for you as the immigrant when you already enter the seats. From those reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
We thank Deputy Leader of Opposition for what was a fine speech. I now call on Member of Government to start the closing half. Here, here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
I'll set my timer first. Okay. If you want to POA, just unmute yourself. I don't have any gender pronouns. Oh, no, I actually have he and him, but yeah. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We agree with the model that are already being brought by the OG, right? But let's say about opposition, we think that they will fail because of the claim that they are bringing, right? So such as claim that saying that they have no trust for the immigrant, saying that these immigrants are not going to be, are less likely to be representing these immigrant in the parliament are less likely to work representing the immigrants, because they are when they are in the parliament, they will work based on the political spectrum and those kind of things, right? And therefore we think that they simply lose because all the assumptions that already brought by them that cannot be proven by the good example, and it's simply seeing immigrant as like someone who was not was a trust unworthy to trust, or those kind of things, right? So 2 things that I will bring in under my speech, right? Firstly, I would like to explain how immigrants in politics, how immigrants can still work in politics. But second, I would like to bring about how actually saying that the status quo is better is a wrong strategy, right? So firstly, going to my first, how immigrant in politics can still work, by the way, right? This actually can be a rebuttal towards the assumption that are being brought by the leader of the opposition, right? So the reason why they are less likely to be in the politics is because of the system that is failed, right? So therefore, being an immigrant in parliament isn't common. Therefore, like you see, for example, in the US, like when AOC being in the parliament, or let's say Ilhan Omar being in the parliament, it is something new. It's something very surprising for them, because it's something uncommon to be happen. Why is something uncommon? Because people in like countries that in under the system that they are defending actually will not vote for the immigrants. Most people will not do that, and therefore being an immigrant in parliament is not something that common, right? But secondly, it tells you like Ilhan Omar and AOC, even if they are the immigrants that are chosen to be in the parliament, they're actually working in a very good way. They are not against the law, and even they are the most favorable and the most famous parliament in the most famous person that works in the parliament, right? So even the chance where they're less likely to be in the parliament, they still be the most favorable, right? So the saying that the claim that saying that these immigrants can be random is actually wrong, because like we need to take a look back in the info slide, right? So these people are not random people that being picked up on the street or those kind of things, or just like random people who we know and being elected and to be in the parliament, right? So we think that like taking a look at the info site, these people are being elected for a reason, right? Nobody will give their voice because of like some random people that they cannot find, right? So what does it mean? Like having these people that are being elected, probably first they have a good political record, right? If they are if they are working in politics, probably there is an immigrant like AOC or like Ilhan Omar. They are immigrants but are actually working in political, and therefore they are being favorable. But second, even if they're not working in politics, in our side, because we already set seats in the parliament for these immigrants, they still have a chance. Even if they're not working in politics, they still have a chance to be elected in the parliament, and it is something important for them, right? Talking about social movements, where you actually raising awareness about there is a leader of social movements, probably, right? So these immigrants can actually come in from the social movement that are talking about social issues, about the immigration, that illegal immigration, or those kind of things, right? They still can be voted to be in the parliament and actually voting about and actually talking about the problems and those kind of things, right? What does it tell you? In opposition, assumptions are not true, that these people are that these random people are being chosen and cannot be trusted. Second, like saying that status quo is better and is better is a wrong strategic, right? Note that immigrants, even if there are a lot, they will still be the minority. Why this is bad? Because the lack of political decision, and they can't give voice of what kind of regulation they're going to make, right? So these people simply, they don't have any political or equal participation when it comes to politics, right? But second, like there is no choice for them to choose what kind of candidate to be the president that they want, right? So I will explain more about this, right? So the context about how they cannot have a choice to choose what kind of president candidate are going to lead their country and those kind of things, right? Simply because let's take a look at French election, right, where there are two candidates, which is actually hard to choose from some Muslim people because of what? Simply these two elected candidate president are not being chosen by immigrants. So like immigrants such as Muslim and those kind of things, they cannot choose these two people because they are basically having a regulation which is evil to this community, right? So have they have no choice to begin with to choose the president. Why does it is important to choose the president if you are in the parliament, right? Like I'm going to introduce you to the system of Indonesia, right? If you want to be a president, you need to be elected first from the parliament's voice. So parliament's voice is something that matters, right? In Indonesia, like it is something that is important, which are like, well, you know, this if you want to be a president in the country, you need to coming from a political party and those kind of things, right? It is very crucial for them to be in parliament in order to give them decision or what kind of leader will lead them at the end of the day, right? Comparatively, like in their side, it is impossible to be happen. Firstly, because they are not coming from political party, right? This because like in our side, even if they are not coming from political party, they still have the chance to be able to work to be in the parliament, right? But second, even if there is an immigration political party, like, you know, there is an Ilhan Omar or those kind of things, the likelihood for them to be voted in parliament is less likely to be happening, as I explained before, right? Because like it is less likely to be happen that they are going to get vote, right? Because people won't choose immigrants anyways to be in the parliament. But second, what does it tell you? In our side, society will think to prepare the immigrant they are going to vote for their nation, right? Even if you live in a country under the status quo that doesn't really vote for the immigrant, be under this system that the creation of seats in the parliament, this certain amount of seats are merely for immigrants and those kind of things, right? So what's the conclusion? In our side, immigrants has voice to choose the leader or having an equal participation for the country, right? But secondly, our worst case, like when political immigrant will probably not working like the assumption that are coming from leader of opposition, saying that they probably leading to political spectrum. We think that like our worst case is still better than their worst case because like there is no possibility for them even in order to choose what type of political spectrum they are going to work, right? Because simply you are not in the parliament and those kind of things, and therefore it is less likely to be happen. And we proudly propose. Thank you.
We thank member of government for what was a fine speech. I now call on member of opposition. Here, here.
Okay, check am audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. Wait a minute. Let me set on them. Okay. POI through chat box. Pronounce he or they. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Unlike opening government, we are going to prove to you why international community help immigrants under status quo is already enough. And secondly, we're going to explain to you why idealistics of the immigrants must going to maintain better under closing opposition and why it is important. But before that, let's engage towards the government base, right? Government says that this is going to be a lot of like other the government already, the immigrants right is already like failed based the government. So that's why like needs immigrants to be represented under the parliament in the very first place, right? But the main question is that they still hardly answer even in the end of until the member of government, they are still cannot answer that how eventually the member of parliaments or majority of the parliaments is going to be suddenly favorable to these people, right? So eventually, other than right, is going to be just keep satisfying majorities and whatsoever, right? But secondly, we think like when a lot of like problem, like let's say like language barriers, or maybe like a lot of increased hatred, or maybe like a lot of problems, something like racism and etc., or like labeling towards this minority of immigrants. We don't think like it's going to help much just because you suddenly part of the parliament, right? Because let's say in the US, the countries that there are a lot of affirmative action inside of the parliaments, but we cannot deny the fact that the majority, let's say, or the right wing is still rising, there's still a lot of racism towards black people and etc. Right? Because like the problem of this is already internalized as their ideology, right? So it's not going to be suddenly change these people to suddenly to not being racism to you and etc. Right? But why then eventually going to be hatred more under the government? Because let's say you are not fulfilling the standard of the majority, or let's say you are not qualified within the standard of the majority, but in government you are being part of the parliaments and you are like having certain ways that you are going to be upheld under the parliament and whatsoever, right? We think like there going to be more sentiment of this refugee in the end of the day towards inside of the government bench, right? So moving on to my contributions. First of all, why under the status quo is why the international community help under the status quo is enough. First of all, this is the frame that never been explained by a whole bench, I think. Because we take a look that this is the high rate of immigrations, right? So we think like the country is that the refugee targeted countries, right? So that it is impossible, like suddenly a lot of immigrants coming to one country from another countries, right? How it is country is actually look like. They are having a problem like for example like Bangladesh who are struggling over Rohingya refugee, for example, or like Norway who are still very struggle under the Syria or the Middle Eastern war refugee that are going to the Norwegians in the end of the day, right? So how this actually look like when they have a lot of problem within the refugees or a lot of problem within the immigrants? We think there is going to be an international communities that are actually have to supervise these countries, right? Because like they are the because they are the war victims, because they are the disaster victims and etc. Right? So we think this is something that are communally helped under the international community, under the, let's say, international corporations like US and whatsoever, because like it is become whole of nations responsible about like the international humanitarian crisis, right? So that's why, for example, Colombian is actually willing to give migrants or willing to give a free pass towards the Venezuelan who are actually want to move to the another countries, or at least like stay in the Colombia before they are finding another proper shelter in the end of the day, right? So that's why we think like it is already enough that what they give, right? Because what they need actually is not suddenly they need an anti-racism, they are suddenly needs words and whatsoever, because what they actually very first is that like shelter or at least like better treatment for them. Or we think even from the international community itself is already easy to like raise awareness through the campaign. If you are really one like anti-sentiment that bad in the end of the day, like what was the comparative in the government way? We think like in the government the comparative is the more like, let's say like this is we are giving them a seat in the parliament. Right? We believe that this is something that are more treatment than just giving them a shelter. Right? We think like in the end of the day, it's going to be since that the government put more prioritization towards the immigrants. Right? We think need to notice that the countries that are having a higher rates of immigrations is not all of them are developing nations. Right? Let's take a look at the Bangladesh who are having problem with like Rohingya refugees, right? So in the end of the day, something that's going to be happen is that like treatment gap towards the immigrants and also towards the current people who are actually feeling that they are disenfranchised, right? Well, this is important because in the end of the day, these people going likely to be marginalized because immigrants in the government side is going to see that the government shift its prioritization to this kind of immigrants, right? So in the end of the day, it's going to be create more sentiment towards like why their welfare is not fulfilled by the gov. It's because like they're having a lot of more burden of these immigrants, right? The matrix is that two things. Firstly, it's that the vulnerable actors, right? Because at least under our words, the marginalized people are, let's say like these immigrants are less likely to be marginalized because they are not seen as someone who are shift its prioritizations, right? And second of all, if the matrix of likelihood, we prove you better, right? Because opening opposition never proved to you how suddenly like NGOs are enough and they are only approved by NGOs is so on and so forth, right? But before that, I take OG.
Yeah, so what international organization that you're talking about here? Are you talking about UN, an organization that literally uses BTS for their PR move? Sure, RM can say I shouldn't be depressed, but I'm still depressed in my bed, right? That doesn't do anything.
Okay, sure. But here's the thing. It is just your premise is actually like only contingent if this UN or maybe like this international community is not actually working, right? But we already proved to you, even let's say like not exact like UNHCR, but we think like another surrounding countries like for example, like I already explained to you the example of Colombia who are letting the Venezuelan immigrants pass towards this country is going it is already still proven much enough, right? In the end of the day. But second of my arguments is that about the idealistics way much better, right? Because we believe that if what we want is then like that to diminish the sentiment of refugee or sentiment of the immigrants or working standard and etc. We think like UR cannot be completed by majority, right? So that's why if the comparative in the government, you want to go inside of the parliament, there is going to be a lot of process of compromisations, right? So that's why it's just going to be like shift their means of an end, what their desire to an end, right? For example, like it's okay for you to underpaid workings or without any proper job security, like law towards works, or you are living in the slum area as long as they can access the country's utility and so on and so forth. And this is something that we don't want to give towards the immigrants very proud to oppose.
Okay, we thank member of opposition for what was a fine speech. I now call on GovWhip. Here, here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, my gender pronouns is he, him. You can give your POI through chat. Let me set my timer first. I'm going to start my speech at 3, 2, 1. Panels, I think the opening batch is only focusing on discussing on the point of view of you as the immigrant community and how you see this as a government and the relationship between those parties. And doesn't necessarily how the majority gonna respond to these motions and how exactly it is very important to see the response and how it is actually going to be benefits for the whole stakeholders in these motions, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let's say we agree with the characterization of immigrants that are already brought out by the opening bench, ladies and gentlemen. So the immigrants is coming from the countries where wars and conflict happening, probably causing by the country that they are living now, by the country that they want to go. They think that they will have a better life. That's why and also like they're getting food to go there because the government has this interest to have a cheap labor and want them to want exactly like cheap labor and benefits from it. So even though you already move and you get food to move to that country, or maybe you in a very hard situations because you don't you already stuck in a very hard situation because you can go back to your old country and eventually you need to struggle and also like achieving your for example like American dream because you already decide what you decide in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. And it is very bad for the government to not care about the immigrant situation here, because it is very important to fight for their rights, especially when you benefits from them, especially when they actually have a right that you need to fight in the democratic country. Everyone got their chance to be represented, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to rebut what's the opposition said, that the status quo is already enough. That's why you don't have this. You don't have to approve this motion, ladies and gentlemen. It's not necessarily true. Even though like the status quo is enough, because they say that international government organizations can help the kind of immigrant, but it is very absurd. They don't necessarily explain which international organization. later on country has sovereignty. There's a lot of procedures for you as an international organization need to pass in order to have these immigrants. You have to obey so many international law. It is going to be complicated. And how much exactly support that you can give to this immigrant community, ladies and gentlemen? If the help is going to be sustainable or maintained in the long period in order to make this immigrant community to be prosperous, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, no, ladies and gentlemen. And exactly why you need to approve motion is because as an immigrant person, you work very hard. Even after you have so much effort compared to the majority, you don't have a good or the equal effort that you deserve to get. This is why you don't get a lack of education. You don't there's a lack of education. You don't have a good salary. This is why people are very are putting their heart into hard situation, and at the end of the day, they commit criminality. And there's so many poverty happening, and the only way to actually voicing out their issues, and the only beginning point that they have is actually to demonstrate anarchically in order to be heard, ladies and gentlemen. This is why representation is very important, as my member of government already mentioned to you. So at least the representation, this representative in the parliament coming from the immigrant community, they can be a mediator. You know, they can say to the government, you know, they can say to the government what the immigrant community exactly needs, or when the government is actually giving decisions that is actually eventually want to help the immigrant community, these figures can actually give the explanations to these immigrants how exactly the program or the decisions will help them at the end of the day. It's going to be good, even if the opposition said that what if this representative at the end of the day will turn back from the immigrant community and eventually become a symbol, something that is not necessarily make a change, ladies and gentlemen. It is not true. Even though they become a symbol, ladies and gentlemen, this representative in the parliament, they have at the end of the day they have a big platform, ladies and gentlemen. Many people saw them, many people see them because they are important. You put them as an important person. At the end of the day, they have platform, big platform, ladies and gentlemen. They have exposure. And in this country that we talk about, let's just say that majority are equally divided to be people who are educated enough and they don't want to be called racist, and they actually want to change and want to support this immigrant. And there's also like people who oppose these immigrants. But there is also people who is in the gray area, and you're trying to change those people who still in the gray area to eventually support you. This is good because when there's more people to support this immigrant community, even though the representative become a symbol, these voices that being helped to voices out by this representative in the parliament is going to demand the government to make a change, because the government is populist. They will definitely listen and care about these issues, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that's why you need to approve these motions. Very proud to propose, ladies and gentlemen.
We thank government whip for what was a fine speech. I now call on opposition whip. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. If you want to POI me, just write it in the chat box. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panelists, I think both sides agree that immigrant is an important actors in this debate, right? But we think this debate should talk about like what is the outcome of this motion being implemented. That like my first speaker are explaining to how the problem will be manifest and how like the status quo right now is already enough to answer this problem. I think as CEO, we already show you like we don't need a new set. Like we have to stay at status quo, but maybe with a little improvement to like make it more better. But before I continue, let's talk about OG, right? So OG bringing the idea why the system failed. They're talking about like the majority in the status quo right now very evil, like because they are conservative and something like that. Okay, assuming that this characteristic is true by OG, right? That just look at this motion. You're giving them the special shit that doesn't like making more of this like conservative individual more anger, like hatred toward this individual because like they just suddenly pause all the procedure and get the special set. So we think all these characteristic of like majority that very conservative more likely to be more destructive in your side of the house. Then they bring about the idea of strugglity, like that how to become an immigrant is really exclusive for you. We think that's not true. Like even if I am not an immigrant, I still understand how the immigrant feel. Like I can still show like reading or watching them in the YouTube, for example, how the media portray them. Like then that's why that all the movement, all the donation can still exist because I can still understand the problem or the struggle that the immigrant feels. So we don't think that if you want to help immigrant, then you have to feel the pain in the first place, right? So we think what we already bring as the CEO, right? Talking about idea of representative, we're bringing to you the idea that OO never broke. Like we're talking about international body, which is like maybe an embassy or diplomatic and any other stuff that can help this kind of immigration to having a better outcome from their life. Like we're talking about this kind of big association when they have like a good strategic and a lot of resources to maintain a discussion with the local government. We think just look at the POI from OG, like when they're talking that this UN or maybe international body doesn't work at all. Then our question is simple: if this big association doesn't work, then how your special seat, which is only content like 10 seats, can suddenly change even like this big organization still fail? So we think more problem in your side of the house. We think in the status quo right now, this international body are already good, like because like they can maintain the connection between the local government. This motion talking about the high immigration rate, right, which is like the main problem which all eyes look at it, right? So we think this will be more beneficial in the term of like talking about policy and how this kind of immigration still live in the status quo right now. Then they bring about the hatred and the trust issue. Like, okay, assume this also true. Like, then how can suddenly giving people a special seat, then people in the majority, the conservative itself, will satisfy with that motion, right? So we think that assuming about like the Bangladesh and Rohingya case, right? Assuming yourself as the people of Bangladesh, like seeing this Rohingya people getting a special seat, that doesn't feel that you in fire like toward this individual because like they are the outsider, but suddenly they get all the seat and privilege to like giving them a lot of benefit like education, like what OG said. Then this is creating more discrimination and more gap that will be accessed in the majority as a whole. So we don't think that this hatred will be softened in your side of the house, but it will be much worsened. Then okay, assuming this also can work and all the barrier like the language and any other stuff that OG bring can suddenly being solved by this motion, then we think the way to solve this problem, or like these people that become the representative in the special state, they also cannot give like the 100% need of their immigration itself. We're talking about the system, like we're talking about the immigration that maybe having the language barrier or like working standard, maybe the regulation that will be passed like will be lower the standard for these people to work. For example, talking about like the underpaid work or like slum area, or maybe like people who maybe can this work but they will get less paid, for example, can be happen, and this is not desirable, right, for this immigrant. So we think all the representative that will be exist in the special state also cannot like fulfill 100% the need of the immigrant itself. It will be much better in our side of the house because like we have the international body which is have get the more like the name itself and also the association and all the member can bring this idea become much better, like about the working standard and something like that. Also, then the other way for you to breaking this barrier, we think at the status quo right now, talking about immigration, they also have the association, like they have the community as well. How can they adapt with the local people, for example, how they can still like having interaction with the local bodies, for example. We think this is the way for you to breaking the barrier more effectively at the status quo right now. Then lastly, talking about justification, like OG bringing the idea that, oh, we as the government, we have duty, right? Because we are already taking a cheap labor, for example, or because we are the reason why this failure condition exists. Yes, we agree that maybe in some extent government have the responsibility, but we have to understand also that as government, you also have responsibility to your own citizen. Like we cannot just suddenly giving them all the or the like free pass regarding how talking about the society. We can also remember like the farmer or maybe the people who in our country itself still suffer and doesn't get represented well. So we think this is the condition that we need to also understand regarding these people. Okay, before I can continue, POI.
Yeah, so why is a total infringement of sovereignty something that people will desire more than having some immigrants inside the parliament?
So we think in our side of the house, this immigrant, like I said before, can still get all that benefit by the international body and the thing itself. We doesn't need like the special seat so these people can get all the benefit, right? Even before this motion exists, people in the status quo right now still get the compensation, like how they can still get the visa, whatever, or the stuff that they can use for work in the local government or something like that. So we think talking about sovereignty on all the idea about like how you can be treated so well under this motion can still also be applied in our side of the house. Then talking about CG, like CG bringing the idea about equal participation and also how immigrant can still be better in their side of the house. We think if this immigrant like having a very good quality individual to represent them, so we assure that this individual can compete in the election process and something like that, which is will be much better, right? Because in this motion, your right as in a special seat candidate very limited. Like you cannot change the budget, you cannot do the voting, for example, that's really bad. But if you like represent it well in the election process itself as a legitimacy representative, we think it will much better as a representative. And also the equality that they bring cannot be happen because like you giving the special seat, so you will not be as same with the people that in need in that country, for example. So the equality that you really champion cannot be manifested. We think as CEO, we are explaining you a lot of things like how the international body is working in the status quo right now and how like breaking the barrier can be solved in another way. Very proud to oppose.
We thank opposition whip for what was a fine speech. Now, is Judge Sachiko okay with like deliberating in this breakout room?
Sorry, could you repeat again?
Are you okay with like deliberating in this breakout room?
Oh, okay. I haven't thought properly for the clash part, but